even if you're not an ally, and for some reason you've listened this far into the podcast, just watch this documentary. I would love to get a room of, conservative people with a bunch of prejudices about this community and this culture and, not empathize in some way with what they're going through.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, The Oral Tradition.
Welcome back to Virtue Signaling the Podcast.
Yeah, Virtue Signaling the Podcast. Welcome to The Oral Tradition. Today we will be reviewing / just chatting about, less of a review, I think it'll be, a film documentary called Kiki. Kiki came out in 2016 and follows the lives of a group of youths in New York City who are a part of the Kiki ballroom culture in that city, their lives, their experiences, and it predominantly follows LGBT folk of Black or Latino or mixed background. And shows their lives, shows their struggles, and how they've sort of found this community through the ballroom scene. And I think a slight it shares a lot of commonalities in subject matter, as another famous documentary called Paris is Burning. I think this documentary much more emphasizes the community engagement and social justice aspect of what they're doing, and taking the ballroom culture that already brings these people together. And there's specific moments in the ballroom, in the scenes at the balls, where they're like, and remember, we have free HIV testing in the upper level, which is like, and there's always lots of food and just this stuff to like, how can we take this thing that already exists in the culture and brings all these people together and make sure that it's also bringing in health initiatives, support for the homeless, etc., in actionable ways. And there's a lot of people. Yeah, this is now going into, but so that's the
good intro.
That's the intro, and a little bit of the the beginnings of what makes this a unique film.
Yeah,
but this film in particular, Kiki, is a really nice documentary.
Yeah,
it was clearly made on a smaller budget. And not, interestingly, it was made by like Swedish people.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, I'm interested to hear where they're coming from and why they chose this subject, to make a film about. But they very much, that's very much in the background. Like, you see the director once or twice, like cleaning the camera or like interjecting with questions, but it really forefronts the lives of these young people. In a lot of ways, it's just, this film is in conversation with Paris is Burning.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my thoughts about it have to do with the ways that it contrasts with Paris is Burning and compares with Paris is Burning. And it is its own unique film for sure. And at the same time, it is a part of the dissemination of this lived experience as much as Paris is Burning. So it's interesting to see, because Paris is Burning was released and is about the ball culture in the 1980s and early 90s, and this is about it today and seeing the changes, seeing what remains, seeing how it's progressed, or not necessarily progressed but transformed, is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right before we started recording, I feel like, and I should say we just finished watching it, like we're very fresh out of a viewing experience, and like it's heavy, and Paris is Burning is also heavy. Like there's still like a lot that the community goes through, And I think it's important to, I don't know, it can be really easy to romanticize it with a show now like Pose, and
which is another just like it definitely with Kiki with like RuPaul's Drag Race, and then Pose, and films like Kiki, and then the resurgence of like, they've sort of brought a resurgence of interest with Paris is Burning, which is like a seminal piece. And so the ball culture and that world of drag and dance and all that language is kind of so much a part of the like the general culture now. Like you have, people of all different lifestyles and lived experiences using those languages, like using that language and using those cultural touchstones. And I think maybe something a little bit where you were going is like not always knowing where it's coming from, and not being aware of the lived experience of the people who are not doing it as a put on or an addition, like a fun bit of sass to their day to day, where we're using reading, shade or reading or voguing or whatever, as just like a fun little bit of flair to your personality, where this is a part of like a deeply entrenched culture, that people don't, that can be trivialized by certain representations of it in the media.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, I don't want this to become a trash talk session about Pose, but it definitely leans in the like glamorized segment of some of the balls. Like the balls look nothing like that in Kiki.
No.
Like it's very there's a super strong contrast between like the costuming and the setting that they do it in, and the kinds of people that attend these balls these days. And what's up?
I was just going to say it's made by Ryan Murphy.
Ryan
Murphy. Thank you, Ryan Murphy. So it's kind of like how ball culture is in this is like how choir culture is in the other famous Ryan Murphy series, Glee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely heightened.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to knock it too much, because it does still dig into the stories of like sex workers and the trans experience and the HIV epidemic in the 80s and all that stuff. So it's got a lot of good things going for it.
Yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah, and I'm still watching every episode, so it's doing something for me. And then as far as this documentary goes, like, and you were talking about, not trivializing their segment of the culture by, taking the catchphrases or the dance moves or whatever. And like, I think a really emblematic image that sticks out to me from the documentary is like when it shows them voguing at the docks or at the pier in the middle of the night, and the voiceover is just talking about how that's just something we go to do to pass the time because we don't really have anywhere comfortable to sleep, or we don't really want to be lying down on the streets, so we're just doing this till we get tired and to let off steam and that sort of thing. You remember the scene I'm talking about?
Yeah, and also if like they have homes to go to, but they don't feel comfortable in their homes and they don't feel welcomed. So just like it's a way of surviving.
Yeah, it's wild, because I think about like, this is weird, but an improv game that I wanted to use a little bit in Queer Prov, our improv group, called Sit Stand Vogue, which is just a variation of Sit Stand Kneel, which is an improv game where you have 3 people and you need every person to be one of those things.
Yeah.
And then Sit Stand Vogue, I was like, oh, it's funny. Voguing came from the gay culture. Let's just do that. And now I'm like thinking twice about doing that. I know that it's not the most inappropriate thing, but like it's not something that I think everyone is aware of, or like something that I don't know, like do voguing justice, I guess. Like how do we do that?
Yeah, like you don't, like, because there's a lightness to voguing and it involves a lot of flailing and it's just very out there. It can be easy to be like, oh, I can vogue, and then like just making and doing it poorly and not actually knowing how to do the dance. Like it is a real dance form that people train to do. So the fact that it's so often sort of delineated into these very simple images and then done for comic, like comic effect in any sort of comedy venue, like a person who doesn't vogue doing it because it's like this silly gay, this flamboyant gay thing is tricky.
Yeah. What are things that you thought about? Just general segue.
My life.
Yeah.
My experience. There's a lot of conversation of intersectionality in the film. And I think if you're interested in what it's like to be in living that, the life, like what it is like for queer trans folk of color in New York City and in the general urban American experience, this is a great representation of that, and it doesn't feel heightened or like people are being represented or misrepresented. Like it feels very grounded. And what I was going to say about intersectionality is it really demonstrates how the lived experience of each one of those people in that community are individuals with their own experience. Like they go to, there's a segment of it where they go to their childhood homes or their childhood cities, and some have mothers who have accepted them and who love them still, and some aren't even allowed to return to their homes. And it just shows that there is such variety in the lived experience of all these folk, which I think is valuable too, because it's so easy to imagine a community as a monolith, and having one lived experience that is shared, and there's a truth to that, but I think a lot of what this film is showing is like the right to be an individual and not be a part of a monolith is almost more freeing, or is freeing for any people. But there's another scene where like the cops come by and they start talking about how like because they're people of color and because they're a part of the ball culture, the cops make these assumptions about every single one of them, and they get kind of clumped into this persecution, which is horribly unfair. So just like this film really exposes the value of looking at people as individuals with their own individualistic lived experience. There's another moment where there's a trans woman, there's a round table discussion happening, and one gentleman brings up the point, an interesting thing that I wasn't aware of, that there are butch queens, so like people who present masculine,
who cross-dress,
who are sex workers, and then who will start by cross-dressing in their sex work and then begin to live and then begin to transition because they can make more money that way. And he seemed to be against that. And then another trans woman in the round table says, I don't know their experience. They're living their lives. They're living their truth, whatever that is. And I can't, and I'm living my life
because she
from
was
where
asked,
I'm coming from.
She was asked, like, does this offend you?
Yeah,
for
how do you feel about
be
that?
Like, a more, like, exploiting a trans identity, so to speak, or whatever?
Is there's a less valid form of that identity. And again, it's just about, that's their individual experience. Like, not all trans women are a monolith. Not all trans women of color are a monolith. Yeah, this is, I think, something that is quite often discussed in contemporary queer LGBT plus culture, but I think a documentary like this really helps to demonstrate what the lived experience of that looks like, of trying to be an individual within a culture.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a major standout line came really early on in the documentary, where one of the mothers, named Twiggy, I think, was talking about
the mother of
one of the houses.
Yeah.
In their ball scene. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I didn't know if you were talking about somebody's bio mother.
No,
because
sorry,
they have some lovely lines, but a house mother.
Yeah. Twiggy is one of the house mothers, and is talking about some of the commonalities that people in this community do still have, and it has nothing to do with their identity and all about how they experience a lowered sense of self-worth or a lowered sense of acceptance and a lowered sense of community whenever they come out as however they are. And I think that's such a universal thing among the queer experience that's like a very crucial element or like undertone of this documentary, of how, you know, this is how these people make it work. And I think like anyone watching that can relate to that feeling of, like, you know, of either being lonely because they can't find their community, or having an aspect of themselves where they feel like this is something that's going to cost me my acceptance and I can't let this out because this will have XYZ repercussions. So that is something I think that resonates super strongly throughout the documentary, and definitely ties into this thing of like, we're not all a monolith, but like everyone still experiences various forms of struggle within the ball communities and just within the queer community at large. And it's a really, I think I also was really struck by one of the trans women who was talking in the documentary about how it was actually the same woman. Her name is Gia, and she's talking about how when the gay marriage bill was passed, that it was largely, if not entirely, thanks to white gay men pushing it forward in Congress and through that whole bill passing process. And it is a super powerful point to make, and something that is kind of apropos of what we're doing right now in this conversation of, like, you know, doing what, like, everything we can to be allies to things that don't apply directly to us but do apply to other people in the queer community. Like, it is, it would just be so inconsiderate for you or I to be like, okay, well, our deals are squared away, and to people in more marginalized segments, they'll figure it out. They have the power to fight for themselves. Like, that sort of thing is just very dangerous. So I'm super glad that they incorporated that into the doc as well. So
yeah, yep, I think it's super valuable for any person who considers themselves a part of the ideas of the queer community or the LGBT community stemmed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to kind of give folks, LGBT people, just human rights. So many people who said, yes, I'm a part of this community. I am a part of this fight. The trans women, the people of color, the women of color, like all those other us's, and are now here where we're like, yeah, like LGBT people, queer people have all these wonderful human rights now, and have been given civil rights of marriage and all this stuff, but it hasn't actually been taken effect because we haven't paid the proper attention to all parts of the community. So I think it's really valuable if you feel that, if you are somebody who is a part of the queer community who feels like, yeah, we've made it. Like, I can marry, I feel good, I feel very much normalized in society, I don't feel any job persecution or anything like that, then
think again.
Take a moment and watch a movie like this and remember that you watched Paris is Burning. Maybe you've watched Paris is Burning and you gleaned all the fun language from it, and you're like, oh, and that's like a bit of 90s, and that's far in the past. It's like, nope. A lot of it is still happening, and the biggest difference between Paris is Burning and Kiki is not any difference in the prevalence of HIV in the community, because one person said the statistic, which I think it doesn't surprise me.
It's just as uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, yeah. I shouldn't be shocked because this is people's lives. But it's like 60% of queer men of color will be HIV positive by the time they're 40 years old. So that hasn't really changed since the 90s. And the ball culture is in many ways the same, and there's still struggles with homelessness. The only difference that I see is so many of these people have so many queer people of color in the ballroom scene have started deciding that they're going to take action into their own hands in regards to being self-advocates and curb the not waiting for anything on high to help, or the larger LGBT community to come in and support, because that hasn't happened yet. And so they're pretty much just said, okay, if you're not going to help us, we're going to do our best to help ourselves. But that doesn't mean that people in the larger LGBT queer community, I say LGBT queer because I know some people identify as queer. Lots of people use queer as a more open term, but I know there are people who still acknowledge it as, or don't connect with that language. They still connect with LGBT or LGBT plus. But yeah, that it's still important for everybody else, and people who aren't queer who are, cis, straight, white, whatever, to be aware that this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's not changing.
Even if you're not an ally, and for some reason you've listened this far into the podcast, just watch this documentary.
Yeah.
I would love to get a room of, conservative people with a bunch of prejudices about this community and this culture, and, not empathize in some way with what they're going through. But, that's not our audience. So,
I think, anyway. Hatred comes from ignorance.
Yep.
Like one of the people in this documentary said, great, we have gay marriage. Fantastic. There's still people who are homeless. There's still people who, there's drug problems. There are still trans women getting murdered there's a higher homicide rate. Like all of this stuff is still happening. And what can the larger community, instead of resting on our laurels and going off to live our heteronormative lives,
did it.
In the suburbs, pick up the baton and fight, because queer people of color were fighting for us all those years ago. They've been fighting this whole time for the rights that white folk now have. So many people of color have not been able to receive, and I just it gets me frustrated. So I think watching this documentary communicates that more eloquently than I can communicate it, and it comes from the voices that need to be heard. Do you have any thoughts? We still have 20 minutes.
Yeah, we have time. I mean, all of this talk about advocacy may shroud or overtake, as it should. It is the priority of the film in a lot of ways, but in the same time, there's still a lot of fun to be had in queer culture.
Totally.
And in balls and in all of that stuff. The costumes are so fun, and the dancing is so passionate, and the soundtrack by Queen Beats, I think is her name, is amazing. Is a lot.
Is so much.
And I don't know it is thematically consistent. I was gonna say it might be jarring if blah, blah, blah.
No.
But like...
It's body positive, I would say.
It is body positive. No spoilers here. You'll have to watch it yourself to know what we mean. So that's super great. And this is something we've mentioned before on this podcast of like sometimes advocacy is going to your local office and protesting and getting bills passed and all of this stuff, and sometimes advocacy is living out loud and having a good time in spite of shitty things that happen on a sociological level. So
yeah, that you bring people in by having this joyful, fun thing, and then they feel that connection, and then once they have that connection, you can, if you have that community, you can work to make change as well.
Yeah.
They're super fun. Just watching, and voguing is a joy to behold. You can watch, there's something just physically powerful about watching a woman or anybody do a death drop. Like you will immediately feel the urge to yell to the heavens after somebody spins around and shakes their arms, and then one of the people in the documentary referred to like giving them the opportunity to slam back, and I love that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the exact phrase, but I say yes. I think that says so, could be used in many ways. We gotta slam back.
Yeah. As in like put your back into it. Like, get to work, also have fun, slam back. I see what you're saying.
And
right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And if they slam us, we'll slam back.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I wonder. Okay, this is.
I don't know if slam back. It's probably not the right phrase, but hit back, something like that.
I know. I mean, clapback is a huge thing. Or I might be showing ignorance by wondering what the origin of death drops is.
Yeah.
But
yeah, where did
there
death
is
drops
there is
come
something
from?
like weirdly like almost symbolic about death drops. That I'm only realizing right now, and gives me the feels, Jordy.
Yeah. That, like one of the people in the documentary said, like their lives are like they're just so accustomed to death, or they're surrounded by death.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's that scene where a guy is retelling his story about how he was told he was HIV positive, and one of his first thoughts wasn't, oh my God, or like breaking down in tears, but his first thought was, now I'm a statistic.
Yeah.
Which is, it's sad. It's very sad. And like, yeah, I don't know. There's not like a super positive note to end on with this one, because like, it's so clear. It so clearly illustrates how much work there is to do, like we've been talking about. So, we'll leave you guys with that. Leave you folks with that. What do you say, Jordy?
Exact same. I think if anything, this documentary, the structure of it is loose.
Yeah.
So you might be watching it, and for the first like 30, 40 minutes be like, where is it going? But stick with it. It has some really powerful moments throughout, and it is more of a vignette representation of the lives of the people in the film. Yeah. And it really rewards watching all the way through. If it's a life experience that isn't something that you feel much about, and then enjoy some wonderful dancing and listen to some very intelligent people vocalize their experience.
Yeah.
Just a solid documentary and a valuable keystone in a very specific part of the canon of like gay LGBT documentaries about people of color and trans folk. Like this film, if you've seen this film, check out The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, check out Paris is Burning. Pose is out there, and it's a big, goofy show in many ways, but it also has, I think, the only cast of predominantly trans women of color in any television series ever.
Yeah.
So
it is very important.
It's super valuable to have that. And I hope that films like this continue to be made and disseminated into the culture, and we just become more aware and on top of awareness, make action.
Yep.
And acknowledge that their experience, if I haven't experienced it myself personally, that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect me, because what affects one person in the queer community affects other people in the queer community. That's what a community is. Mm-hmm. It's an important film to remember all parts of our family, all parts of the family.
Yeah.
Slam back.
Slam back. We will see all of you next time on The Oral Tradition. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've gotten something out of this. If you want to reach out to us on social media or just give words of encouragement, you can leave us reviews on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are at QueerFilmPod on Twitter, and we are queerfilmpod@gmail.com. If you want to say hello, write in. We might start incorporating people in the future, or just, it's encouraging. We like to know that there are people out there listening to what's going on.
And if you felt we sounded ignorant or silly,
God. Oh boy.
just take a little gander at our review for Call Me By Your Name, and you'll see some great examples of people vocalizing when they feel we don't know what the hell we're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Because we freely admit that we're just two people living our own lived experience. So please, unironically,
if there's something we've gotten horribly wrong,
tell us.
Yeah, it is important for us to hear that stuff, because we're babies in our own way.
Yeah, and we'll continue to learn for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Nobody has to teach us anything.
Yeah. Please, we are not looking for mentors. Yeah, we're just curious. If people are engaging.
Yeah,
anyway,
we'd love to have people engaged. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. Once again, this has been The Oral Tradition. I'm your one co-host, Jordy Matheson.
And I'm your other co-host, David Borja.
And we'll see you in space!
The queer space, that is.
The safe space.